The old man sat alone in a silent room, the blinds drawn tight against the London twilight. The glow of the television flickered against his face, but he wasn't watching. His hands trembled slightly as they clutched a glass of whiskey, the ice melting into nothing. The once untouchable empire builder, Rupert Murdoch, sat surrounded not by power or allies, but by shadows and ghosts. Outside, cameras still lingered, hungry for the image of a titan brought low. Inside, only the hum of silence answered. The fall of a man who once bent nations to his will had begun with whispers, with wiretaps, with the sound of other people's secrets stolen in the dark. But the story does not begin here, in the silence of disgrace. It begins decades earlier, with a boy in Australia who understood too early that power was never given, only taken. Rupert was the son of a newspaper baron, but when his father died suddenly, the empire was small, fragile, and half-forgotten. In that void, young Rupert felt something awaken, a hunger sharp and insatiable. He would not inherit greatness, he would create it. His mother remembered the way he stared at headlines as if they were weapons. "One day," he whispered once, "the world will read what I tell them to read." Step by step, acquisition by acquisition, he built his empire like a gambler stacking chips. Local newspapers in Adelaide, then Sydney, then London, then New York. Each deal bolder than the last, each success feeding his belief that rules were written only to be bent. Murdoch didn't just buy newspapers. He bought influence, the whispers of politicians, the fears of rivals. In smoky rooms, over rare wine, he would smile faintly as ministers leaned close, promising favors for headlines. His media didn't simply report, it dictated. Governments rose and fell under his gaze. Prime ministers knew it. Presidents knew it. And Murdoch knew it most of all. There was a rhythm to his empire, scandal and spectacle. Sensational headlines screamed across front pages. Tabloids pulsed with sex, crime, and outrage. He understood the human appetite for blood and whispered sin. "Give them what they crave," he once told an editor, "and they'll forgive you anything." And for decades, they did. The public devoured his papers, watched his channels, and lived inside his narratives. Murdoch's empire became not just a reflection of culture, but its master. And in that mastery, he grew blind to danger. Behind the headlines, inside the corridors of news of the world, darker methods began to take root. Journalists learned that secrets could be stolen more easily than earned. Private investigators were hired, not to uncover, but to intrude. Phone calls intercepted. Voicemails hacked. Mothers mourning children found their grief transformed into copy. Celebrities, politicians, even royalty, all became prey. The newsroom buzzed with forbidden knowledge, adrenaline mixing with guilt, yet no one stopped. Because the boss liked results. Because circulation soared. Because success was a drug, and the empire demanded its fix. The first whispers of scandal came like a breeze through a locked house. Suspicions raised in Parliament. Questions asked in courtrooms. Murdoch dismissed them with a flick of the hand. "Competitors are jealous," he muttered. His editors laughed it off. His executives swore loyalty. But the breeze grew stronger until it became a storm. Names leaked. Evidence mounted. And then the revelation that broke the dam. Journalists had hacked the voicemail of a murdered schoolgirl. The public gasped. Politicians recoiled. Advertisers fled. For the first time, the empire trembled. The moment came like a blade. Murdoch, once the puppeteer, was called before Parliament, forced to answer. Cameras swarmed. He sat hunched at a table, his voice low, stripped of its usual command. "This is the most humble day of my life," he murmured, but humility did not save him. The world saw not a master of empires, but an old man caught in his own web. His son sat beside him, defensive, nervous. At one point, a protester lunged with a pie, and the image of Rupert Murdoch, frail and startled, flashed across every screen. The Titan had become a target of ridicule. In the following weeks, the unraveling accelerated. News of the World, his prized tabloid, was shut down in disgrace, its name forever poisoned. Executives resigned, some arrested, some broken. Politicians who once trembled under Murdoch's power now distanced themselves, denying ties. The empire still stood, vast and global, but its aura of invincibility had cracked. Behind closed doors, Murdoch raged. "They're making me the villain," he snapped at an aide. But the aide stayed silent, because everyone knew the villain had written his own role, and so the silence returned. In his penthouse, surrounded by screens that once carried his word across continents, Murdoch felt something he had not felt in decades: weakness. His hands trembled more often. The phone rang less. Allies spoke of legacy instead of future. He poured another drink and stared at the headlines, not of others, but of himself. Murdoch Empire in crisis. Shame of the kingmaker. The words cut deep, because they were his weapon turned against him. The man who once ruled with whispers now lived haunted by them. Every ring of the phone sounded like another revelation. Every silence in the boardroom felt like betrayal. He wondered, late at night, if this was how it all ended, not with triumph, not with control, but with shame. He thought of his father, of the fragile empire he had inherited, of the power he had built. Was it worth it? Or had it all been built on nothing more than stolen voices in the dark? The old man leaned back in his chair. The whiskey glass slipped, fell, shattered on the floor. He closed his eyes. Outside, the storm still raged. Inside, only silence remained. But silence, he now knew, could be louder than any headline. He awoke at dawn, restless, his body aching with the weight of years and secrets. The city outside still pulsed with life horns, footsteps, the hum of morning commerce, but in his apartment, the sound was muted, like the world had turned its back. Rupert Murdoch, once the architect of noise, now lived in a cocoon of suspicion and fading relevance. The newspapers he owned still hit the stands. The channels still broadcast his narratives, but his name, his face, carried something else: shame. Everywhere he turned, he saw fragments of his downfall replayed. That parliamentary hearing, the cameras capturing the way his shoulders slumped, the way his carefully controlled voice faltered. The pie attack, absurd and humiliating, a single slapstick moment that burned into history. The great manipulator of perception, undone by the perception of weakness. He could not rewrite it. He could not control it. For the first time, Rupert Murdoch had lost the story. But memory is cruel. It dragged him backward, forcing him to relive the empire's triumphs. New York in the 1980s. Skyscrapers gleaming. Deals inked in smoke-filled boardrooms. He remembered the thrill of seizing the Times of London, the audacity of buying 20th Century Fox, the way critics called him reckless while rivals called him unstoppable. Politicians courted him, begged him. A prime minister once whispered, "With you behind us, we cannot lose." Murdoch had only smiled. He knew he was no longer just a man. He was an institution, an invisible hand shaping entire nations. And yet, the higher he rose, the darker the shadows became. Editors joked about black arts in the newsroom, laughter masking unease. Reporters boasted of scoops that seemed too perfect, too invasive. He told himself he didn't know the details, didn't need to know. But deep down, he did. He always had. Power demanded sacrifice. If someone's grief became tomorrow's headline, then so be it. Empires, he told himself, are not built on kindness. They are built on control. The scandal stripped that illusion bare. One by one, those who had sworn loyalty disappeared. Executives who had once raised toasts to his genius now testified in courtrooms. Politicians who once bent their will to his empire now pretended they barely knew him. And his own son, his heir, the one meant to carry the torch, sat across from him in meetings, eyes cold, questions sharp. How could you let this happen? James asked once, voice trembling with anger. Rupert didn't answer, because the truth was too simple, too cruel. He had let it happen because he believed he could never be touched. The press, his own weapon, turned against him. Day after day, headlines screamed of corruption, of shattered privacy, of ruined lives. The parents of the murdered girl stood before microphones, their grief laid bare. The world listened, the world wept, and the world turned its fury toward him. No empire, no fortune, no power could wash away that stain. Nights grew longer. He sat awake, staring at the glow of city lights through the curtains, hearing voices in the silence. Snatches of conversation lifted from memories, or maybe from guilt. A sobbing mother. How could they? A furious politician. He thought he was above the law. His father's voice, low and disappointed. Is this the legacy you wanted? He drank more. He spoke less. His once commanding presence at board meetings became a hollow shadow, a figure too stubborn to surrender, too weakened to command. Investors whispered. Directors plotted. Even his family fractured, lines drawn between loyalty and survival. Still, part of him clung to defiance. I'm not finished, he muttered one night, his reflection staring back from a darkened window. They think I'll fade, but I'll never fade. He believed it, or forced himself to. Empires like his didn't vanish overnight. They crumbled slowly, brick by brick, until only ruins remained. And Murdoch refused to believe he was standing in ruins. Not yet. But the silence betrayed him. No longer did his phone buzz with ministers seeking counsel. No longer did presidents call him for support. He was no longer the kingmaker. He was simply a man, old and diminished, sitting in the echo of his own making. The world had moved on, but it had left him behind with the ghosts of the hacked calls, the stolen grief, the scandals etched into history. Murdoch remained, restless, haunted, waiting for a redemption that would never come. And still, somewhere deep inside, a voice lingered, a whisper that both tormented and tempted him. If you could do it all again, would you change a thing? The old man closed his eyes, the city's hum fading into nothingness, and knew the answer. Because power was never about truth. Power was about control. And control was the one thing he no longer had. And so the silence became unbearable, heavier than any headline, louder than any scandal. The silence was his final enemy. But silence has a way of breaking. Sometimes in memory, sometimes in madness, sometimes in confession, and sometimes in the echo of a voice that never should have been heard. The story of Rupert Murdoch did not end in prison or exile. It ended in something far more cruel, the collapse of reputation, the erosion of fear, the slow decay of relevance. A man who once shook nations now lived surrounded by whispers he could not silence. And perhaps, in the quiet hours of dawn, that was the cruelest punishment of all, because empires fall, but shame remains forever.